I know who you are, Miss O'Malley, and I know who you work for. The question is, does Jones? Welcome to the Indiana Jones universe, the podcast that explores the incredible adventures of the world's greatest globe-trotting archaeologist, Indiana Jones. Each episode is a casual and somewhat humorous, opinionated conversation with a slightly sophisticated analytical study of the expanded universe content from the Indiana Jones franchise. You can expect to find discussions about the adventures of young Indiana Jones, the further adventures of Indiana Jones comic books, the Staff of Kings and Emperor's Tomb video games, the Indiana Jones novels, the original soundtracks, and so much more. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Indiana Jones universe. Today, we are extremely excited to have a special guest joining us on the podcast. As many of you know, since this podcast began, we have been interested in exploring the video game Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings in greater detail. We have always thought that this was the most underrated video game in the franchise and deserved so much more recognition. In particular, we have spent a lot of time talking about the iconic soundtrack from this incredible game, and today, we are thrilled to finally get the chance to speak with one of the composers who worked on Staff of Kings, Mr. Ray Harman. Ray is one of the most sought-after film and television composers working in Ireland, and he is also an accomplished guitarist and songwriter. He is a two-time winner of the Best Original Score category at the Irish Film and Television Awards and has also been nominated an additional 7 times throughout his career. Ray, it is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you, Will. I'm delighted to be here. I'm honoured to be asked, and I hope I can remember as much as you need me to remember for this podcast.
I'm looking forward to getting into this game. It's been such a sort of lost piece of history in the Indiana Jones franchise, and now to revisit it, specifically talking about the music, is absolutely fantastic. So before we get into the game, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your career as a musician. What experiences early in your life influenced your decision to become a professional musician?
I grew up in West Dublin, an area called Tala in the... born in the 60s. So an uncle left a guitar on the top of a wardrobe and nobody was interested in it. I saw it one day and I asked, could I have it? And that was literally it. I taught myself how to play guitar eventually. And
wow,
I would, I'd play in front of the mirror for days on end, imagining, being in concert in the local girls' school, trying to impress them. That was pretty much that was the extent of my ambition at that stage. So then that was really it. I have no formal music education at all. I'm just self-taught. So
wow.
I then went on to join various bands in my teens, and then I finally met my band where we became moderately successful when I was about 19. That band is called Something Happens, and we were reasonably successful on the college circuit in the 90s. We toured the States a lot, and Europe.
Wow.
Had great fun. We were always penniless, but that didn't matter. It was really, really good fun. It was our little gang, still good friends, and then that's pretty much the start of it. I'm self-taught, and then I bought a piano with a publishing advance that we got at one point, and I started teaching myself that. And then I suppose, if you want me to carry on, when we got into our mid-20s and late 20s and early 30s, we all sort of started to drift away and try and find real jobs, I suppose, as we were growing up and having families. But I really wanted to continue writing music, because that was, even though I loved the performing and touring, the writing was really my favorite bit. So I tried to get into writing music for advertising here in Ireland, because at the time it was very lucrative. But it was a sort of a closed shop. But I did start to get work scoring short films, and as most people will find, when you start scoring short films, most people in this industry will find, particularly in music, when you start working with your own peers, people the same age as yourself, even though you're doing it in college and you're doing it for free, what happens is your careers tend to develop together. They progress together. So the directors and producers that I worked with on those early short films went on to make other shows. They brought me along. You develop a reputation and so on. And that's pretty much how I'd sort of drifted over into scoring for film and television, which I've been doing ever since. So that's a very short history of how I got to here.
That's fantastic. And it's great to hear that you kind of developed your interest in music just from being self-taught and picking up a guitar and kind of having that, intrigue and enthusiasm for it. Now, I'm curious, was there a specific moment that impacted your decision to compose music for film and television, or did it happen more naturally?
Well, I was always interested in film, and so the band, we were always fascinated with film, particularly art films, and we would if we weren't rehearsing or gigging, we would go to the local art house cinema here in Dublin together and watch all the latest films. So we were always interested in film. So was I, not specifically noticing the scores at the time, but it must have been going in there. And then later, when we were touring, I'd started to notice, the scores in films. And I'm trying to remember the first ones that I would have actively noticed. It was probably something like, these sort of films where the score is partly a commercial track type soundtrack thing. That was a sort of a toe in the door to it. And then I think probably in the mid-90s, I really started to dig into film scores. Oh, it would have been as well. Being a guitar player, probably the early ones would have been the likes of Paris, Texas by Ray Cooder, where you'd actually, you'd be struck by the fact that it's almost entirely a guitar score, something like that. It started slowly like that. And then in terms of becoming more interested in orchestral elements to it, when I was on tour with the band, we had a keyboard player, a piano player. Unfortunately, he's passed since, but Patrick Fitzpatrick was his name. And he had a very, a full academic education, a musical education. And he was just so generous with his time and his knowledge. He was a very funny guy. But we were very interested in all types of music. So I really liked Stravinsky back then. I would play it and I couldn't make head or tail of it. But Fitzy, as we knew him, would explain, what was going on. What was this instrument? What was that instrument? So he was sort of an early tutor for me in terms of starting to, I suppose, see the orchestra the way you would see it from your academic training. I couldn't really see that at first, but then Fitzy would point out, well, that's a bassoon, obviously at the start, because when you hear that first time, you don't know what it is. That's incredible, in the Rite of Spring or something like that. I mean, that's a great one to learn on because there's so much in that piece in the Rite of Spring. There's an awful, yeah, and it's almost like from a rock band, rock musician's perspective, I suppose it's slightly punkish, I feel it is. I still feel it is. It's pretty. It's threatening. But I loved it, and he was brilliant at explaining not only just the instrumental palette, but he, because of his education, he was really familiar with the way Stravinsky wrote. The way he, as a rock musician playing on guitar or keyboards, if that's what your writing instrument is, it's verse, chorus, bridge, solo, back to a verse and a chorus, right? It's very simple blocks. But Fitzy was great at explaining. You don't really think about you don't write like that when you're writing an orchestral piece. It's a different sort of way of doing it. You do it in lines, and yeah. So he was a fantastic sort of mentor and coach for me with that sort of stuff. And then early technology, I suppose. In the early 90s, the band that I was in, we decided rather than having to spend a lot of money on recording studios, we would buy our own small recording setup that we could use ourselves. And at that stage, that was quite a big thing to do. It was amazing for me because we had a tape machine, we had an Atari 1040, which
Oh yeah,
you remember those? Yeah. I actually think I still have it, and so that in conjunction with a Tascam 8-track, and I think the software was. This is getting really nerdy now, Will. Sorry, but it was Uniter by. Oh no, was it Notator, German company, which eventually was bought by Apple, which is now Logic Pro.
Wow.
Yeah, so eMagic Notator. That was the first software that you could actually play a MIDI keyboard into the software, and then it would come up as notation on a page. That was groundbreaking for me, being able to record sampled instruments. So that was really the start of it for me. That was where I said, actually, I can do this. I could actually put together, if I had the correct samples, I could put together something that sounded like an orchestral piece.
Yeah.
Of course, it didn't have the samples then, but it was a start. So that was an eye opener for me, and the rest of the band they weren't really interested in digging into the technology, but I absolutely loved it. So. I was allowed to play with it as much as I wanted to. So I learned a lot very quickly with that stuff. And that's really where it came. That's how I ended up drifting into the short films, and then the feature films, then TV shows, and so on. And then this strange sort of offshoot where I did the Indiana Jones game, which was great fun. But I didn't really do anything else afterwards in gaming. The only other time I got into any sort of gaming music was when I did some sort of online games for the lottery, the national lottery. So that's how I ended up there.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much of a wide range of experiences you had. You talked about the technology and kind of getting into Stravinsky and orchestral music, coming from somebody who, kind of learned a guitar just on their own, and that's great, because I think that amount of diversity is so valuable in a career in music. And as you sort of think about the music you create, either now or in the past, what genres or composers have inspired you the most? Do you feel like you have a signature style, or is it always changing for each project?
I really do love orchestral music. I really, really do. And I particularly love orchestral music that pushes the edges of what the instruments can do and what the orchestra can do. But also, it's really important that you don't lose the audience. The balance is to write something that's really challenging, but is compelling at the same time. I understand, if you were to write an atonal piece, it's interesting from an academic perspective, but it needs to have some sort of emotional attraction. So I suppose that's the sort of stuff I like. And to be honest, film music is full of people like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who crossed over from, like me, I suppose. I suppose that's my. I'm showing a bias there towards the composers that sort of drifted over from rock or pop music to scoring. So I really like that sort of stuff, and I suppose because I came to it from a technology background, I really enjoy when the two elements are combined in a way that feels natural. It's hard to get it to feel natural. Hans Zimmer is brilliant at that.
Right.
He probably invented it. The sound of the modern score as we know it now, that combination of technology, live orchestra, sampled orchestra, and so on. I'd argue that he probably is responsible for kicking that off. I couldn't tell you whether I have an identifiable sound of my own. I try, and every score I do for film and television, I try and make it a little different and try and use different instruments. I collect a lot of ethnic instruments and so on, and I try and play those as much as I can. Whenever I have the budget to record live players, I always do that. And if I can, when I'm doing so, I try and write in such a way that there's something unique in the score. First of all, that helps the drama and the story, but also is interesting for the players, something that they're not accustomed to doing, or something that just is fun for them, I suppose.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's also great, too, that you mentioned Hans Zimmer, because that's exactly what I was thinking of when you started mentioning this idea of going from sort of rock and roll through technology and orchestration. So I think there's a similar career path there for sure.
Yeah.
So let's start talking a little bit more about Staff of Kings here. And I'm curious if you could tell us about how you initially got hired for this game, because you sort of alluded to it earlier. This was sort of relatively early in your career. You're working primarily in Ireland, and you had never, ever scored a video game before. So how in the world did this opportunity to compose music for this game come about?
Yeah, I know. That's the other one. It's very simple. There's a family connection.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So my brother-in-law is Dara O'Farrell, who's a very well-known voice director in gaming in California in the US. He's a genius, if you ask me. So Dara was the voice director for LucasArts when they were in the Presidio building in San Francisco. So he mentioned that he had been working on all sorts of games for years at that stage. He mentioned that the game was coming up, and did I want to meet, or did I want an opportunity to pitch as one of the composers. So he set up a meeting for me with Jesse Harlan, who's the staff music supervisor at LucasArts at the time. Jesse's lovely, and he's a great composer too. So I went out to San Francisco, went to the LucasArts building in Presidio, which was just an incredible experience. Just to see that place, it's just amazing. Are you in the San Francisco area, or are you in LA, or?
I'm actually based in Chicago.
Oh, you're in Chicago. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not too early. It's not as early as I thought it was for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I went out to the Presidio building with them, and I met Jesse, and I got on well with him. And then he said, okay, we'll demo a few things, and then we'll see how it goes. So I went back home, and I think I demoed about 10 pieces.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really determined to do it. I really wanted to do it. What happened was I demoed 4 or 5 of them that were, hang on a second, maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe 8 pieces I demoed. So there were a few, maybe half of those were the slower sort of exploratory type cues that they eventually ended up using in the game.
Oh, wow.
Well, they were like that. And then the other half were more like action pieces, boss fight, chase things,
Wow.
That I think Gordy ended up doing. So that's what happened. I sent those back to Jesse. He listened to them, and he obviously decided that, okay, I was more suited to doing the exploratory, mysterious stuff, I guess. And then he decided that I'm guessing this now. I'm just presuming, but I guess he decided that Gordy was clearly more suited to the boss fight, vehicle chase sort of. Yeah. So they commissioned me down to, I think it was 8 pieces, and I think, yeah, I delivered those. And I know you have about 5 of them. I went looking for some of the demos of the bigger, the boss fight.
Oh, wow.
The fight scenes that I did. Now, I found the demos, and I'm actually too embarrassed to let you play them on.
That was my next question. I was like, can we hear that?
Yeah, you'll have to let me think. I mean, I like to think I'm sort of, not afraid of anything like that, but they're really demo-ish, And and to be honest, I understand now why. Like at the time, the technology was sort of limited, and again, my ability at the time was wouldn't have been anywhere near Gordy's ability to work with large orchestras with that type of cue. Yeah, they're a bit suspect. But anyway, anyway, I think I pulled it off with a few of the what do you call them, the exploratory mystery cues,
Oh yeah.
which they eventually used. Yeah, it was great fun. I really immersed myself in. At the time, I remember before I started, they'd commissioned me, and then I had a few months before I started. So I just remember I just completely spent the whole summer with headphones on, listening to John Williams, and then
Wow.
listening to his influences as well. You know, the likes of, well, he would have been influenced by all the modern classical composers, the Stravinsky's, Debussy, Prokofiev's,
Yeah.
as well as Korngolds, and then I was aware as well that there's a sort of the way the films, you know this, I'm sure, the approach to the scoring of those films was a particular type of heightened score that was referring back in a sort of a nostalgic way to films from 30 years previous, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that they were sort of adventure films. It was sort of a wholesome approach to the scoring, but it was actually brilliant. Like, it's his contemporaries at the time wouldn't have scored them the same way. They probably would have used the technology available at the time. So it was a really interesting thing that Spielberg and Lucas, urged. You hired him for that reason, because he was just uniquely, well, he's brilliant, obviously a genius, but his sort of experience and background was just perfect for those scores. So that's what I did. I just immersed myself in that. I didn't have the chops to sort of analyze them in an academic way. So I just sort of tried to absorb them, and then experimented for a couple of months.
That's incredible. And I mean, also to create, 8 or 10 demos, I mean, is like unheard of. It's like usually you send one thing over and it's either you move on. So is that sort of implying that basically the majority of the music that you wrote in the demos is kind of what we hear in the game at that point?
Yes, I think so. So, okay, so you would have had, there's a indie puzzle, Istanbul, Sudan, Turkish Suspense. Yeah, I think they were all some of my original demos, or
Wow.
parts of them were my original demos. So it would have sort of developed them and expanded them, and obviously, there were certain instructions, if I remember at the time, about how they needed to be formatted for use in a game at that time, which I wasn't familiar with, in terms of the way the cues, they needed to be moving and developing all the time. And then they had to be shaped in a particular way so they could be looped, if I remember correctly. And then I would have had to deliver stems as well. So, the separate elements of the separate orchestral elements, I think. And then also, I think I had to bear in mind that at any point in the game, it could shift immediately into a fight or a chase. What was interesting about it was I thought that was going to be very difficult, but once I got it in my head, it was fine. And I remember sitting down with Jesse, and he had Logic open in the Presidio building, and he was working on another game. I can't remember what it was at the time, but he showed me on Logic how a slower, more sort of mysterious exploratory cue can suddenly just go into with the addition of just a crossfade into a timpani roll and cymbals or something like that. It can immediately go to a fast chase or fight thing. So once I saw that, I realized, okay, that's all manageable. So yeah, that's what I remember. As much as I remember, apart from the amazing experience of being to the Presidio at the time, I do remember getting a tour of sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I do remember going to the Presidio and building and I had lunch there, which was incredible, looking out over Golden Gate Bridge. And then they brought me on a tour, and I saw they had just built a motion capture stage.
Wow.
Yeah, for the next game that they were working on. I don't know if it was indie. I think it might have been a Star Wars game that was coming up.
Yeah.
And I walked into this room and it was just amazing with cameras and these suits with the little dots on them, and then there's a couple of beautiful old cinemas in that building as well that look like Art Deco from the 20s or something.
Wow.
Beautiful place, really incredible place. So yeah, and that was it. I was told about they sent me the art direction style guide. There was I was told about the various different scenarios and geographic locations that he would be. So I was made aware of the ethnic elements that were needed between each cue. That's something I really enjoyed doing, that ethnic element, bringing in the ethnic feel for each particular geographical area. So yeah, I'll stop waffling now.
Well, that actually perfectly transitions into my next question, because as you sort of alluded to, one of the interesting aspects of this game is that, they also hired Gordy Habb to do all of these chase scenes, but they were also using existing music from the Indiana Jones films by John Williams and also music from the Young Indiana Jones television series. So totally different styles of music all throughout the game. So how did you kind of approach, balancing the iconic sound of John Williams and trying to capture that while also making sure that your music was distinct and unique for this game in that way as well?
What I tried to do, I was nervous about that. I do remember working hard to try and make sure I was using the same tonal palette. That really the main reference would have been all the Indiana Jones scores, which I listened to all the time, just to make sure I was using more or less the same fundamental instrumental palette. That was the main thing. And then, of course, the sort of melodic approach, which I couldn't really explain to you academically what it is, but it was more about just using the same type of melodic approach that I think John Williams would have done. Also, the other thing as well is that I wasn't really a gamer myself, but my kids were. So they were here, playing Harry Potter games, and I was watching them and listening to the scores, which again were John Williams.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was a really useful thing for me to watch and learn how those exploration mystery cues worked, and how John Williams would have approached those things. So it wasn't quite as strict. There was a little bit of elbow room, there was a little bit of elbow room to be experimental. And I was surprised once you dig into to John Williams' scores. He's a genius, obviously, but some of it's very strange when you dig in. Some of it is so I figured that was a license to go off on little tangents, as long as you stayed as close as you could. I did try and use the main indie team as much as I could, even if I broke it up and inverted it or whatever. So that was really the approach. It was by feel, really. And then each cue, as I was doing each cue to try and keep some sort of momentum and development, I just remember thinking at the time with John Williams, it was all about ideas, melodic ideas. It was all about hooks. Get as many hooks. Try to get as many hooks. I mean, I know I didn't, but he did it so naturally and effortlessly. I just tried to stay in that frame of mind where, okay, let's do 8 or 16 bars, and now you start transitioning to something else. And then when you've done another 16 bars, you try another change, another hook. So I tried to do that as much as I could, so that it's always moving along. You're always slightly on your toes listening to it. There's always a little tension. Ideally, you don't really know where it's going. And I think that sort of worked for Jesse. That was what he was hoping for with those cues. I mean, to be honest now, my contribution to this is only a tiny aspect of it. I think Gordy's stuff is amazing on this game. It really is. It's spectacular work. And I believe he's still really busy with gaming.
Yeah.
I never did anything again in this field, but but it was great fun.
I was going to say, yeah, what you're talking about with these sort of, hooks and moving lines, especially when you listen to the music isolated, removed from the game, that totally comes across. I think you did such a great job of being able to kind of create all these different interesting ideas and capture our attention in that way, which I think is needed when you're doing all of these exploration scenes within a game and there's not a whole lot of movement or action going on within the characters and within, these sequences. You need the music to provide that. So I think that's fantastic. Now, you talked about a little bit, your conversations with Jesse Harlan. I'm curious if you had any other memories of sort of initial conversations with the creators or executives who worked on this game, maybe when you were creating the demos or after you officially got hired. Did they provide you with any specific instructions or temp music or anything to kind of guide you?
No, to be honest.
Wow.
It was entirely through Jesse. Initially through Dara, my brother-in-law, who I think you should reach out to Dara and talk to him. He's a really interesting guy as well. He is, yeah. No, it was almost entirely through Jesse. I mean, they were very knowledgeable and they were very clear about what they wanted. And I found them really good to work with. They gave very clear instructions and very clear parameters about what they wanted in terms of the tone. And it was sort of great. It's like a really good director. They sort of trust you. They give you the envelope you can work in, and then they let you go and do it. And if it's working, they'll say, yeah, that's great, thanks. And if it's not, they'll come back and tell you. But otherwise, they sort of leave you alone. And I think at the time, I had enough confidence, maybe too much confidence, and I was able to. And I mean, to be honest, I was really, really, really keen to do it. I was really eager to do it. I put an awful lot of time into it, so I sort of somehow pulled it off. But yeah, they were quite good. And I mean, I think there wasn't a mad huge list of instructions. They gave me the art direction guide, which is actually really helpful. That was interesting. And again, immersing yourself in the film, other films scored by John Williams. And even, as I said, watching my kids play other John Williams scored games was really useful. That was actually a really useful thing to do as well. But yeah, they were very hands off. In the end, it was done quite. I remember it being, as soon as I got started, it was actually quite a quick process. It all happened within maybe 3 or 4 months. My section of it. I'd be curious to know, actually. I'm sure you'll end up talking to Gordy at some point, but I don't know how many cues he did for the film, and I know he obviously went and recorded with live orchestra, and so I'd love to hear the stories behind all that.
Yeah, I think he recorded 10 tracks in total, at least what was released. But yeah, he's since gone on and just recently scored the new Indiana Jones game, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which is kind of an insane, full circle moment for him. Because like you, this was kind of, I think, one of his first games and kind of early on in his career. So that's great. Now, when you started composing this score, where did you sort of begin creatively? You mentioned this art direction guide and sort of the idea of concept art or maybe some early gameplay footage. But, where did your sort of first kind of note come from? Where did you kind of first start on the page? You have a blank sheet of paper. What sort of specific cultural influences or genres kind of inspired you?
It would literally have been sitting down, starting to doodle on the piano, using instruments from my orchestral palette on Logic Pro here, and trying to come up with simple lines that were mysterious, exploratory, and melodically sort of in John Williams territory. And it would have been just idea after idea after idea until I hit on one. I don't know whether everybody else works the same way, but that's more or less, it's torturous, man. It is torture at first. I still do the same thing and I still hate it, and then I love it. It's just trying idea after idea after idea, and then eventually you'll hit one, and that one is strong enough to move forward with, and then it's all just joining the dots after that. I think once you have one and you're moving with that, it becomes easier. You start to see a tiny light at the end of the tunnel with it. Say, for example, we're talking about the Sudan Desert piece or Turkish Suspense one. I think at the time, one of the things that helped me a lot was I was plugging into, John Williams music and Prokofiev and Stravinsky and Debussy and so on. So if ever I was stuck, I would just take a step back, listen to, a random piece from one of those guys, and you'd hear some little thing that they did, in a really interesting articulation or something like that, and I'd try and copy that, and that might send you off in a direction that really helped. It was messy, but it was fun at the same time. I remember it happening reasonably easily, relatively easily. I mean, it's always a bit of torture when you're starting to write stuff from scratch. But the brilliant thing about film music and game music is that there are always parameters. There are always you need to be in this territory. You need to use this palette, and the mood needs to be this. So that is actually, even though it seems like it's restrictive, it's not. It's a real help when you're writing something for film and television. If you can imagine, I know you know this, Will, but it's with a wide open brief, you don't really know where to start. But when you have clear direction and sort of, you can almost see it or hear it in your head. You have a feel of it in your head. Then it's easier. You just need to sort of pull at that thread a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting too to kind of think about the way, as you mentioned, some of these, aspects of the game might be a little bit more constricting or might be a little bit more actually useful in order to kind of think about the ways in which you can creatively write a piece of music. So how did you sort of approach writing music for the different locations within the game? Because each of the tracks you wrote are very, very distinct.
It's 17 years ago, Will. I can't remember.
That's perfectly fine. If you can.
No, I can. I can. Again, it was just about imagining what John Williams might do. I mean, he gives loads of hints in his films because a lot of the films are set all over the world, so you can always just go back to them and, okay, this one was in the Middle East and this one was in Istanbul or something like that. So just go in and listen to it for a bit and then try and do something like it. That's sort of, I think that's probably where I was going from, or what I was trying to do. I do know that I really did try and stick to what I thought was the way he wrote, which again, I couldn't explain what that is, but I felt that at times I had a handle on it. But it was more of a sort of, this might be something he'd do, and it's close enough for this. So let's see if I can build around it and get it sounding authentic enough. And again, I think my job was probably easier because it was the exploratory ones were, there were a lot of it was about atmosphere. It was really just that sense of tension, sense of mystery, never quite letting you relax. So it wasn't a massive technical exercise in terms of the stuff Gordy had to do with dense and fast orchestrations and so on.
I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about the behind the scenes details about actually creating the score. You mentioned it was around maybe 3-4 months. Did you compose everything in your studio? Did you work with live musicians? Did you perform anything on the score? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was 90% done in Logic Pro with sampled instruments. And the instrument library that I used most is called Vienna Instruments. Would you know those as a sample library?
Sure.
Yeah, so I bought those, I started investing in those as soon as I could. They were very expensive at the time, and they were the best, and I think they're still really, really good. And they were it was the most solid sort of sampler instrument, I suppose, at the time. And they were they're really high quality. Obviously, all sample libraries they are fairly limited. But with these, I felt that you could actually get an awful lot out of them if you actually tweaked the dynamic capabilities of each individual instrument and approach it as well. I think the main thing I tried to do was approach it as much as I could like a proper score. So like my orchestral template is laid out like a paper score. You start with the high woodwinds and you go all the way down to the low strings, and the whole thing is set out there like that. I tried as much as I could to mimic. I mean, as we all know, the sound of an orchestra is it's obviously great players, and they're all playing really well together. But a lot of it is the room that they're playing in and the way they play with the room and so on. That was a really difficult technical thing to sort of try and get together. I spent a lot of time working on that. Yeah, it was virtually all sampled instruments, mostly Vienna instruments. There were some odd, obviously, ethnic instruments I used. I also used a live violinist for some parts, and I played some percussion like daff for some
nice.
of for some of the Middle Eastern things, and I think there's even gambri on one of them. I have a gambri. Yeah. So yeah, that was pretty much it. I can't remember what I used for this. There was a lot of ethnic instrument samples. So, for example, I think I remember listening to your podcast, and you pointed out there were a Chinese type of zither.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember what that's called right now, but that's a sample, of course. But then in one of the other cues, I think it might be Sudan, there's a strange sort of, it sounds like an insect buzzing, to be honest. That's actually a live violinist. That's a brilliant violinist from here in Ireland called Ken Rice.
Wow.
What had happened was I got him out to try and create a sense that you're in a scorching hot desert with insects buzzing around you. And that's precisely what he did,
Right.
and it's in there. It's buried in there. You can actually feel it, So, but again, like, I didn't know what the scene was going to be. There was no explanation of what the character would be doing or which characters,
Wow.
So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue into let's listen to some of the excerpts of some of the music you created for this game, because it's absolutely brilliant. It would be great to get your sort of opinion and sort of insights into some of the things that we've talked about on the podcast before. So if you don't mind, yeah, let's start here with Sudan Desert and give this a listen. Maybe some memories will come back in the process. Here we are. So that was Sudan Desert, composed by the wonderful Ray Harman. For everyone listening, that was that was used in two parts in the game. First, of course, at the very beginning in the Sudan Desert, but then it also gets used in the Nepal mountains. And so, of course, you hear so many different timbres, and the howling wind a little bit, and the cello pizzicato, and the indie theme, of course, sneaks its way in there. Any thoughts on that, Ray, or anything that sort of came back as you were listening to it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know they used it in the Nepal section. That's cool. That's cool. And it worked. Did it work there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
That's great. Right. So the first thing that struck me when I was listening to it was the intro section with the glistening strings. I'm gonna fess up now, and I'm gonna tell you exactly where I ripped that from. And I think I know exactly why. At the time, there was a film had just come out with Daniel Day-Lewis called There Will Be Blood, and there's an absolutely brilliant score to that film by Johnny Greenwood. Johnny Greenwood used this really startling effect in that film where he uses a sort of the whole string section glistening up in unison from one note to another. And my suspicion, to be honest, is because he did that because he had just got the Vienna Instruments Pro, and there's actually an articulation in the instrument that allows you to do these glisses, and it's so lovely, and it's so useful that he probably thought, oh yes, God, this is great. It's such an unusual thing. Well, it was at the time. This was a great opportunity to use that. This is a lovely way of opening a cue, I suppose. It's quite dramatic. That's the other thing you can hear throughout it is Ken Rice playing violin and viola. He played some viola in that.
Oh, great!
One of my favorite instruments. And then the other thing that you're hearing all through it is I think it's a lithophone. It's a type of marimba sound that's rolling through the cue. That's a Vienna Instruments patch as well, if I can remember correctly.
Wow!
And now that I listen to it, I didn't realize at the time, but I think that might be a little bit too close to one of the Predator films. It's a little bit like one of the cues from the original Predator.
But it's like Stravinsky. He has that quote. He's like, great composers, don't borrow, they steal. Isn't that right? Or something like that? Yeah, right.
I wouldn't call myself a great composer. But if Stravinsky said it, he said it was okay. Yeah.
He gave us permission.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I thanks for playing that. I haven't listened to it for ages, so it's
oh sure,
yeah. That's the thing I remember about it. It was about moving from one idea to the next, to the next, to the next, and that worked well enough, I suppose, in that respect. I'd love to do that again. I'd love to re-record it and remix it better.
Yeah, let's listen to the next one now. This is Chinatown, San Francisco. That was Chinatown, San Francisco. For everyone listening, that was after the first gunfight in the San Francisco level when Indy explores the warehouse, and then they use it again in the Panama level when he's exploring the sacred tree room. So yet again, kind of gets used for another environment. And yeah, tons of ethnic instruments, and that ending, that brass fanfare is so Indiana Jones, I feel like. It's absolutely fantastic. Any thoughts about this one?
Thank you, Will. Wow, they used it in Panama as well. Again, I wasn't aware of that. Wow. Yeah, I do remember. I'm pretty sure I remember. I have a vague recollection that this. I do remember referring back to some cues in the second Indiana Jones film.
Oh, Temple of Doom.
I think it might have been Temple of Doom for this. In the middle of that cue, there's a sort of an element where it's the way he uses low strings and they pause and they just come in, in and out. And then there's a sort of a playful element that he was brilliant at using or creating a playful atmosphere. I do remember trying to recreate that. Actually, there's one cue that I do remember referring back to a lot with, oh my God, what was it called? It's called Motorcycle something.
Oh, Scherzo for Motorcycle and Orchestra.
That's, oh my God, I just love that. I love that cue. It's gorgeous. Yeah, it's so fun. It's the playful element of it that I loved about it. That wasn't necessarily for this, but it was just, that's one of the things that I thought was really important to somehow try and get in John Williams scores. Even though you're trying to keep people on edge with these cues, there is a sort of, there has to be a fun element, they're, fulfilling the brief. I haven't heard that one. I actually don't think I have a copy of that here even. I think all the files, the logic files for this are on a hard drive that's corrupted somewhere up in an attic. I couldn't find anything for any of these.
That's an archaeological adventure on its own, right, to find those.
Yeah. Nice to hear it again. Thanks.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Let's move on to the third of the 5 ones that we have here. This is Turkish Suspense, which I have to say might be my personal favorite of the 5. That was Turkish Suspense, composed by Mr. Ray Harman. For everyone listening, that was featured several times in the Istanbul level during all of the puzzle sequences in the harem. And of course, you hear the sort of subtle hint at the first four notes of the Indiana Jones theme in there, that beautiful woodwind opening, and as you were sort of alluding to earlier, Ray, all of this sort of ethnic percussion at the end is very, very well done. Any thoughts on this one?
Thanks, Will. Yeah, actually, I think that one was probably the one that came together best. Yeah, I enjoyed that. Haven't heard it in ages. You can hear me on the daff right at the end. I had to get the last word in.
That's awesome.
Had to be me right at the end. Yeah, I enjoyed that. I think I managed to, with that one, get the sort of the orchestral balance as close as I possibly could to, the overall feel of the way John Williams' cues might have sounded. I do remember there was a thing in the middle that I was trying to do that I loved about John Williams' music, was that there was he does this really interesting rhythmic thing with low strings and percussion. I was trying to sort of do something like that. It's probably 20 seconds into the cue. Boom, 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 boom. So you hear it in the main Star Wars themes, the way there's this really strange, unsettling, it's not unsettling, it's brilliant, but it's really hard to pin down what exactly they're doing, what the bass, the low strings are doing. And I loved that idea, So I think that was what I was trying to do there. I think the woodwind thing, I think it's clarinet, I'm not sure, at the top. That just seemed to work well. Yeah, I feel like that one came together quite well. Total fluke.
No, it's great. It was the one that I remember when I first played the game all those years ago. It was the first track that stood out to me when I played the game. Because of course I was familiar with the John Williams music that they used in the game because I'd seen the Indiana Jones films already. So it was the first, original piece of music that stood out to me as like, wow, this is really interesting and unusual and different. It doesn't feel like it was trying to copy something that had already been done. That's what I appreciate about what you brought to this game. You brought something brand new that I don't think anybody had ever experienced in an Indiana Jones adventure before, and I appreciate your willingness to go above and beyond to do that.
That's really nice. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Of course.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I did. Yeah, it was interesting to try and incorporate the theme in.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was more successful than others, but yeah, it was getting there with that one.
Well, let's move on to the next track now, also from the Istanbul level. This is Istanbul Museum. That was Istanbul Museum. For everyone listening, that plays again in the Istanbul level, this time exploring the harem after activating the final statue. And yeah, this one I think also is very similar to Turkish Suspense. Turned out really, really well. You have that sort of epic sense of grandeur with a much more kind of denser orchestra palette there with a lot of instrumentation, and that beautiful sort of bell chime kind of motif towards the end there. This one's really, really fantastic as well. Any thoughts or recollections about this one?
Again, thank you, Will. Very kind words. I do remember, well, the early section of it, again, when I listen to it now, I do remember trying to incorporate that playful element from, sorry, what was it called? The motorcycle cue again?
Oh, Scherzo for Motorcycle and Orchestra.
The scherzo, yeah. I just loved that playfulness, but that sort of movement. And I tried to do, that's probably the one I referred to most when I was writing that. The other thing I do recall now at the end section where it builds, that's again something that I noticed with a bunch of John Williams cues from his indie films, is he would have this cue which was very gently building with this ominous sense of something awful is going to happen, or we're going to encounter something awful. So that's what I was trying to do with the end section of that. Again, just a nod to the way John Williams did that sort of thing so beautifully. I think I tried to do it in one of the other cues as well that you played earlier on. It's just coming back to me now. Yeah, it's fun hearing that again. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's great. I mean, to hear you talk about like the way you, just from simply listening, because I mean, music can become a very technical thing, to a certain degree, when we talk about theory and breaking things down. But, especially on this podcast, the goal is to just sort of like think about music a little bit less intellectually and a little bit more emotionally. And it's interesting just the observations that you're kind of explaining to me from just listening. Like you mentioned in the last one in Istanbul Museum, the sort of driving rhythmic strings, which is, totally like the Imperial March, which was, people kind of say based off of, The Planets by Gustav Holst. So there's these like, little things that you kind of think about when you are composing music, and you take these little ideas and combine them into different things and experiment and try things.
That was very much a thing that I got huge pleasure from when I was doing it. It was the fact that, I mean, when you watch these films, they're just so exciting. And the music is so uplifting and brilliantly done. So when you have the ability to actually explore how it was done and get paid for it, it was just amazing to be able to really dig in and work out how he did those things. First of all, how he wrote them. The interesting thing about the way he writes is this: the melodies are all genius. They're clearly genius, but they're often very, very simple. When you take the whole thing apart and dissect it, it's really surprising how it's much larger than the sum of its parts. The thing is much grander, much more beautiful than the sum of its parts. And it was just a joy to be able to try and recreate that. And simply listening to him and the way he did it actually inspires you to push yourself a little bit further in the way you write, even though obviously you're never going to anywhere near him. But it was really, really interesting thing to do. Yeah, great exercise. Really brilliant.
So let's listen to the final track now. This is German Puzzle. That was German Puzzle. This, for everyone listening, was featured in sort of a small section of the game, in the final level in Odin, right when you're outside of the blimp, kind of exploring, trying to sneak your way in to find Magnus Voller after the shootout. And yeah, this one harmonically, is sort of kind of a puzzle in its own way, right? Very ominous and interesting. It's so very unusual and cool. I mean, what I appreciate about all these tracks is just the emphasis on atmosphere and tone and reverb and dynamic contrast and timbre and just experimenting with sort of a sound palette, I guess, in that way. So well done once again.
Thank you. I think that was one that, like, I don't know, it was probably overcooked. Way too many ideas, and the mix is a little strange to me as well. Maybe too much going on in that one, but the balance wasn't quite right. I would say now, if I was to give that to you to arrange, you'd leave half of it out, and it would sound way better. There was. I know it started off as a sort of a military effect theme. I suppose that's what I was trying to do. The bit that I think works best, the thing I remember about it, is the section at the end. I remember being sort of obsessed with a Stravinsky piece at the time, and it was like, I'm trying to find it here while I'm talking to you, and it's only as I heard it, I remember thinking, there's a tiny section in this piece of music that Stravinsky wrote as a commission for it's the name of a house in California.
Wow.
And it's absolutely beautiful. But there's a little section in it, and I was just obsessed. I thought, how did he do that? How did he do that? So that's what I was trying to go at the end. That's what I was trying to achieve, something similar to that piece at the very end of that. But it was interesting to hear it again.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting that, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, most of the music you wrote for this game is much more ambient and atmospheric, and it's like a total 180-degree difference from what Gordy Hab did. Not to say that one is right or wrong, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you scored any action sequences or cutscenes or anything that had any sort of dialogue at all. Instead, it was meant to accompany settings and environments. And so, as a result, I'm curious, because you mentioned that I think this was the only video game you've worked on. Are there any specific challenges when composing music for video games, or did you find it easier compared to film and television?
To be honest, this was easier because, in a sense, I knew clearly that my job was to create, as you're saying, these atmospheric settings. That was it. I just had to imagine being in those scenarios, playing the game in those scenarios, and from watching, again, as I said, watching my kids play, for example, the Harry Potter games where you'd see similar scenes, I had a very good sense of what I needed to do for each one. So, in a sense, it was easier than working to a film or TV scene, in that you had a outer limits to the tonal palette and the style of writing and so on. But inside that, you could do whatever you wanted. You can change when you want, come up with ideas, try it. If it sort of worked, then it moved into the next section. Okay, you're good to go. And then if I sent it to Jesse and he approved it, we're done. But it was a really nice experience to be able to actually do that. With film and television stuff, it's a little trickier because every scene is completely different in a film or TV show, so the instrumentation drops out at the right point for dialogue, and the tone is correct, and so on. It's great fun, of course. I still love doing it, but it is different, and it's a much more pressured environment in that most television and films have to be done very, very quickly nowadays, whereas I remember with video games, their gestation period is very long. I'm sure it's quicker nowadays, but I know it was long back then. That's for sure. It felt like a real luxury. It was such a privilege. Yeah, so that's the difference. That's the main difference, I think. I suppose the only thing I'd say, right, is I'm not sure if it's the same now. I suppose the main reason that I didn't sort of pursue going back into video game music, I just got hired more in television, film and television. But there's obviously you get paid for scoring video games, but there's no back end, there's no royalty. Technically, it's not a public performance. So if you're trying to make a living from it, it might be difficult unless you're doing other stuff at the same time. The royalty back end is one of the ways that you can sort of do lower paying jobs but still manage to keep things afloat by, and particularly coming from a small country like Ireland, where there isn't really even today, there isn't really a huge gaming industry. It's difficult to do. I'm sure it's different in the US. If you want to become a work in film and television music, there's a sort of a structured way of doing it via sort of apprenticeships or assistants and so on. Like, I think that's an amazing thing about the US, and sometimes in the UK. In Ireland, there isn't that. We just don't have the industry size or the population to support that. So, I think that's one of the wonderful things about the way working in the US in music and film and television compared to Ireland and Europe, maybe.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, this game has sort of, as we sort of talked about, didn't do as well as I think LucasArts wanted it to do when it got released, and so it sort of had this again. It sort of got lost in the mix, and there hasn't been another Indiana Jones video game until this past year, so which was really interesting. Now, we talked about Gordy Hab a little bit earlier. Obviously, he wrote most of the action music for this game. Was there ever any conversation of you collaborating with him or other composers, or was it just like you're entirely doing your own separate thing?
Yeah, it pretty much was. There was no talk of collaboration. I sort of half expected that maybe there would be some sort of setup where we would exchange cues and see does this work with you? Does this cue clash with what you're doing or anything like that? But no, we were left to our own devices, and I think Jesse clearly felt that as long as I was doing my bit as instructed, and Gordy was doing his bit as instructed, and I think Jesse probably composed some cues as well.
Wow.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of cues that I've heard that sort of sound like mine, but they're not mine. They might have been Jesse's. I'm not entirely sure, but I think Jesse felt that if he can make it work, as supervisor putting the score together in the game, his instinct about that was fine. If he was happy with that, then I was fine with it. It was surprisingly easygoing. That's what I found.
Now, all the music we just listened to, you may recall this, but when the game was launched, something very unusual happened, and this is getting very specific as far as film and television scoring is concerned, but you and Gordy both got to release all of your music on your websites for free, which is unusual because usually there's an official soundtrack that gets made, or just it doesn't get released to the public at all. But the 5 tracks we listened to were from your website and Gordy's as well back in 2009. Did this happen for any specific reason? Was it because, you wanted it as a portfolio sample? I mean, it's very unusual for just music to be freely released to the public like that. Do you have any recollections of why that happened?
I genuinely don't, Will. I remember you saying that this on one of your podcasts that this happened, and I actually don't even remember putting it up on my own website, to be honest. But I do vaguely remember an email from Gordy. Now that you say it, and he probably mentioned, we're allowed to release that. So I probably said, okay, well, if Gordy's doing it, I might as well do it as well. But yeah, you're right. It is unusual because they technically, the contract you sign, LucasArts own that music. They technically own it. So it's pretty good that they did. They allowed us both to use it and to use it as a sort of part of your resume, I suppose. Being able to put it up on your website, it's a pretty prestigious thing. I mean, I do remember when I finished scoring it and it went up on IMDb. It was great. I felt like walking down the street with a parade behind me.
I just worked on Indiana Jones.
Yeah. Did you?
Right. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, some of our fans listening, I'm sure, are dying to know the answer to this, and if you don't, it's totally fine. But I'm not sure if you're aware of this. But Staff of Kings, as we sort of talked about, was in production for a long time, and when it got released, it didn't do as well as LucasArts wanted. It was not well received by critics, and the main reason for that was because there was actually at the last minute a canceled version of this game for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. And since then, it has sort of been rumored that this was actually going to be an entirely different version of the game with different controls, different graphics, different gameplay, but the same overall story. So did you have any knowledge that this game was being produced at all, or that it was canceled, because from what we've sort of figured out, there was going to be an entirely separate soundtrack for it as well. Was this something you were aware of at all?
Oh, wow. No, I had no idea about any of this.
Wow.
Yeah, this is why you should reach out to some of the other people who were involved in the game, like Dara or Jesse. They'll probably be able to fill you in on that stuff. No. Wow, that's a great mystery. That's intriguing. I had no idea about any of that stuff at all. Sorry.
No worries at all. That's interesting too, because it sounds like there were some, as I think we talked about earlier, some sort of pieces of music that were featured in the game that seem to be somewhat of a mystery. They're not attributed to any composer, so I'm sure there was some things behind the scenes going on there with some additional music, perhaps. Now, you talked about a little bit, your conversations with Jesse Harlan. Did you ever play the game and get to see how everything was implemented?
No, I didn't.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, I never did. Oddly enough, for some reason, my kids didn't play it here. So I never actually got to see it. I think I remember seeing a few years later on YouTube, I saw scenes of it. I thought, God, that looks great. It looks really good. I don't know why. I think you know what it was. I think it was because right after I'd finished scoring it, I got very busy with other work on TV and film, and I'd moved on and sort of half forgotten about it. And my kids had moved on to different sort of games. I don't know what sort of car chase games or whatever they were doing then.
Now, two final questions here. As a composer, what are you most proud of from this score? Is there a particular moment where you feel like your music really shines through and enhances the experience of the game?
I think it was what was the third cue?
Turkish Suspense, I think. Or Istanbul Museum, perhaps?
Yeah, either one of those. I think they just felt like I got as close as I possibly could to the way John Williams might have done it if I had, managed to get him over here and get him drunk or something. And and hobbled him a bit. I felt like just listening back to them there, considering the skill level that I was at the time and the technology level. Yeah, I'd pass those. I like those. I really like those. So yeah, I'm proudest of those now when you play them back. I'm definitely not embarrassed by them. Let's say that.
I was going to say, I think we need a follow-up episode to hear the demos and the other pieces of music.
You know what? I'll tell you what. I will send them to you, and you can have. And when you've stopped laughing, you can come back and let me know what you think. The ideas there's some good ideas in there, but I don't know. I must have drank way too much coffee or something, and just put every single thing that came into my head down, and they're a bit of a mess, but they're funny. You'll enjoy it for that.
Well, as I was going to say, I mean, to what you were talking about earlier, to me anyway, it's impressive that, first of all, you created so many demos at the beginning of the process before even getting hired. And then for like pretty much half of those, at least, we would assume, to actually get used in the game. I'm sure there were mixed revisions and so on and so forth. But I mean, that's pretty impressive, I think, to just sort of have that much enthusiasm. So I applaud you for that, at least. So as you reminisce about your experience working on this game nearly 15 years later now, what did you take away from the experience, and what impact did it have on your career as a composer?
I think the biggest thing that I took from it, I learned in that probably about a year, I learned so much about orchestration, literally pulling stuff apart. It was an incredible period of just being given, because it was paid. To be honest, I'm sure they won't mind telling me. Like, I think I was paid $20,000 at the time for the thing. Now that's a complete buyout. I don't own the music. I can't, you can't use it for anything. So it sounds like a lot, but it was, over that period of time, it's. But the thing that I learned from it and that money obviously allows you the time to explore how to do things, which I didn't have any formal training and ability to do. So that allowed me to invest in samples, technology, take the time to actually pull apart John Williams' cues and other composers' cues, and take the time to sort of work out myself how to orchestrate up to a certain way or for certain cues. That has been one of the most valuable things that I've been able to bring forward. And if you do that enough, you develop an intuition about it. Because when I talk about orchestration, it's not the way you think about it. I'm thinking about it in terms of virtual orchestration. Because a lot of the work that I do, we don't necessarily have the budgets to always hire live players. So a lot of it has to be done in the box in Logic Pro with the best possible samples that you can use. And then you augment it with some live players. I play stuff myself and so on. So that was probably one of the most valuable things that came from it. You can hear how some of my experiments were more successful than others, and that's actually part of the learning process, I'm sure.
Yeah.
When you get so you make the mistakes and you learn. You don't make those mistakes again, and then that's been so valuable going forward when I'm working on films and TV, particularly because the timelines are the schedules are really, really tight, so you don't have much time to spend tweaking stuff. You need to be able to do stuff quickly. So the stuff I learned doing indie has been incredibly valuable for that. It's really nice to talk about it, and it's lovely to revisit the tunes and just chat about it. I'm delighted to be involved. I was delighted to be involved in it. I'm delighted to be involved in this conversation. I'm really looking forward to when you talk to the other people and hear what they say about it too. So that's it.
Well, Ray, you have been absolutely generous with your time today. Thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast to talk about all your phenomenal work here on Staff of Kings. And if it wasn't already obvious enough, we're huge fans of your work here. So thank you very much for this.
So kind. It's been an absolute pleasure, Will. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much. And for everybody listening, if you want to learn more about us or get in touch with us, you can visit our website, www.theindianajonesuniverse.com. We have an email there. You can also follow us over on X and join our community of listeners and follow along with what we're doing and get announcements about things earlier than expected. And of course, as always, thank you so much for listening, and we appreciate your support. Once again, I'm Will.
And I'm Ray Harman. And until next time, so long, Dr. Jones.